For those who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Corinne Hafel, and I'm with the U.S. Green Building Council. I want to begin by thanking Renew Wisconsin for inviting us all here today and creating this space for this important discussion that's titled Data Centers and Energy Use. It's really wonderful to be at this event where there are so many like-minded people who are dedicated and deeply committed to a more energy efficient, viable future for the state of Wisconsin. At USGBC, our mission is to transform markets so that sustainable, healthy, and resilient buildings and communities become the norm. And much of my local work focuses on helping local governments, commercial real estate leaders, and organizations of all kinds to set sustainability goals and then verify progress towards those goals. Now, data centers are an increasingly important part of our built environment, and they sit right at the intersection of energy use, building performance, economic development, national security, and community impact. So that makes today's conversation a very natural fit for the work that USGBC does every day, and bringing these diverse partners together in order to move us all together as a state towards a responsible and equitable growth in this area. So today we're here to explore how data center development is evolving and what that means for Wisconsin's grid infrastructure and how communities, and oh my goodness, my notes are out of order. Oh, it's double-sided. That's exciting. And development can work together with transparency and good planning, like, noticing your notes are double-sided. So this is a movement of rapid change and one that requires thoughtful dialogue. So today I'm joined by 4 exceptional panelists and leaders who bring a range of perspectives to this conversation. So I'm going to introduce them very briefly because we talked at length about how we wanted to allow as much space for conversation as possible, but we do welcome you to go to the app, look up their information there. I also welcome you to download the app because we will be collecting questions in the app. So in order to do that, you just go to the schedule, add this session to your schedule, and then there's a question and answer component that comes up that you can feed your questions through. So first off, we have Kathy Kuntz. She directs the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change and brings 3 decades of experience in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and community-centered sustainability initiatives. We have Dan Ebert, who's a partner at 5 Lakes Energy with more than 30 years of experience in regulatory leadership, climate and energy policy, utility strategy, and market transformation work across our region. Next, we have Tyler Hubner, who leads at the energy market development for Google in the central United States and previously served as a public service commissioner in Wisconsin and, of course, executive director of Renew Wisconsin. And then finally, we have Louis Liu, who is a senior sustainability project engineer with Relco, leading product sustainability work, emissions analysis, and embodied carbon strategy for digital infrastructure. In addition, he chairs the National iMasons Climate Accord Equipment Working Group, and selfishly, he is a leader on the USGBC Market Leadership Board here in Wisconsin as well. So I do want to thank each of you for being here and for the insight that you're going to bring to this topic. So I'm going to wander over towards you now, awkwardly. Watch me strut. All right. So I think that we will start with talking about how over the past year, it is near impossible to open up any sort of social media feed, news feed, etc., and try to avoid the topic of data centers. So the Reuters recently reported that filings across the country point to more than 150 gigawatts of planned new data center capacity. That's a nearly tenfold increase from what exists currently today, and the development is spread widely across the country. They further identify that 24 states now have at least a gigawatt of planned additions, and Wisconsin ranks 14th amongst them nationally for future capacity growth. So that means that Wisconsin cannot avoid this topic, that we are not on the sidelines, and that we're fully in the mix. So the decisions and the discussions that we make over the next 1 to 3 years are going to be critical for the well-being of Wisconsin. With that context in mind, I would really love to start with the question to frame this topic. So What forces globally and nationally are driving today's surge in data center development, and how is this trend showing up in Wisconsin? Kathy, do you want to kick us off? You're welcome.
Okay. Am I on? Yeah? Okay. So I want to, Corinne, you did a great job of, we're in the middle of this AI revolution, artificial intelligence, and lots of data center growth. We're constantly all using our phones for everything. Surprise, that means there needs to be facilities. I think for me, as someone in local government, when I think about how this trend is evolving, I think about the other side of it, the social side of it, and the fact that we're in this moment of, because we're in the middle of a big transition, this is not unlike the moment at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution when, as things were changing fast, some people went off and lived in the woods. Other people started factories. There was like a wide range and a lot of disagreement. A number of new religions spawned out of that moment. I mean, we're a little worked up, okay, at all the things changing around us. And I think what that means in this moment for local communities is they weren't necessarily thinking about data centers, but suddenly here it is. And in an earlier session, someone talked about when there's an information vacuum and how, social media hates a vacuum and fills that with all kinds of information that may or may not be right about the topic. And people get really worked up. And so we're in this moment where we don't trust each other, where things are happening. We're not sure they're all good things. And now we've got these really big decisions to make that are really big decisions. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
I'm happy to jump in. Tyler Hebner with Google. As Kathy alluded to, I think Google is synonymous or part and parcel with the growth of the internet, right? The fact that the internet was going and then Google organized it. This is way before my time, but Google organized it in a way that was so useful. And then as Google evolved over the years to not just search sort of reference materials and things that had been available in the past, but now you can search things that are happening right now. And it's just exploded the amount of information that we're all seeking, that we're all using. Of course, Google has evolved. I'm going to move this down a little. And has all kinds of products and services that many of us use every day. And so Google as a company has continued to grow for many, many years. A lot of the growth of the past decade has really been extremely efficient in the sense that a lot of small, medium, even large-sized companies had a server room, right? And so everyone was building and operating their own secure kind of email system and file system somewhere in the hallway, and you kind of heard it was kind of loud in that room when you walked by, and you always wondered what's happening in there. And now, really the first revolution that happened was a lot of that activity went to specially designed, super efficient data centers, such as the ones Google and many other companies operate. And so you're taking this really distributed and somewhat inefficient computing into the cloud that's super efficient. So there was actually a lot of savings from that. And if you Google search things from the late 90s and 2000s, there's articles about, oh my gosh, how much energy is this personal computing revolution going to use? And in fact, that personal computing revolution up to now actually was quite efficient and didn't end up taking as many resources as expected. But we have reached somewhat of an inflection. And we had our earnings call yesterday, so now this is public information, but the amount of money that we spent last year on chips and infrastructure was far greater than we had spent the year before, and now the guidance for what we want to spend this year is again doubling. And so Google is super bullish at the corporate level about artificial intelligence, machine learning, not only to help our users, but really to solve big societal problems. We've got projects working on cancers, we've got projects working on air pollution, we've got projects working on wildfires, all these really cool solutions that Google engineers are coming up with that rely on the AI and ML. And so we think there's a really huge opportunity for societal improvement from AI. It's on us and our peers to really make that happen. And I agree with you, Kathy, from where we sit societally, there does remain a gap, and this is where I'm going to leave it. There does remain a gap between what our sort of brightest minds at Google think is possible with this technology versus what the average person, a data center's coming to your community, why do I need that? And so that's on us when we come to a community to really fill that with what we think is the truth and what's going to happen in that community. So
Tyler, do we have to use the Google search engine?
no, you can use the search engine of your choice, Dan. But if you want the best results.
I certainly, Kathy's comments and Tyler's really, I think, framed this up the right way. I want to sort of think about this in the context of what does that mean here in Wisconsin? And when I think about the big picture, I think the emergence of this economic opportunity, and that's really what it is, and that's how the state has approached it, is the biggest threat to our climate and clean energy goals as a state. Because if we don't do this next steps the right way, we can put ourselves behind the 8 ball in meeting our goals for zero carbon by 2050, and to support this transition to clean energy. And this is the Renew Conference, right? This is about renewable energy and making sure that we're building the right kind of future. And so I think, from a big picture, the conflict between the rush to lead, right? The Wild West, if you will, of AI right now. Kathy talked about the Industrial Revolution. I think that's appropriate, but I would go back to the dot-com bubble, right? There were winners and losers. And there are going to be winners and losers in this fight too. And we are being asked by all of them to respond as a state. And I think the challenge and the question is, do we have the right strategy and framework for responding and supporting this, right? I think Tyler's right. This is inevitable. This is the next path, and they will be coming to Wisconsin. So I think the challenge that we have is, how do we want to move forward and make sure it's also balancing our other priorities as a state?
And to help round out the conversation, to set a stage of the global trend and national and here in Wisconsin, I want to provide you some statistics coming from an engineering background, provide some number for the context. Today, there are about 10,500 data centers globally in the world. Now, majority of them actually were built before the AI. Actually, about 80% of the data center today were built before the AI boom, prior to 2022. Now, since the race with ChatGPT and other advanced AI model development has started, there are 2,000 data centers being built globally. And US, from the electricity consumption perspective, consume 176 terawatt hour, which is about 4.4% of the total electricity consumption of the country in 2023. And that is projected to grow 2 times to 3-fold, up to 12% of the country's total electricity consumption by the end of 2028. And then, as you can imagine, power is not the real estate, it's not the cost of development, it's power that it has become a primary determining factor where new data centers are being built. So Tyler gave a great example in terms of how data center owner-operator are racing for it, but the development trying to chase after wherever power is available is another factor that is driving the speed race that we are in the data center development. With the unprecedented capital investment, we're talking about $61 billion last year alone that went into data center development, as well as the hyperscale expansion from Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon Web Services. Developers, they're trying to race to build these data centers at a region where power is available. We're talking about Texas, we're talking about Phoenix, we're talking about Georgia, as well as the Midwest. So today in the US, there are about 4,000 data centers, and 1/3 of those data centers are in just 3 states, Virginia, Texas, and California. The Midwest accounts for about 1/4 of the total data center in the country. And if you average out of the 12 states in Midwest, about 77 data centers per state. Wisconsin had 51 that are built and being developed and planned. So the big picture here and the bottom line is we're in an unprecedented global surge of data center development, driven through AI, through capital investment, through the race to develop the most advanced AI model, not only between companies, but also between different countries, as well as the backdrop of the national competition. So Wisconsin is definitely in no exception of this process. That's why we have a condition there.
I hope you see why we invited these four for this conversation. So no, all four of you did a really great job of setting the stage here, right? So let's transition a little bit, right? So we're taking the data center conversation from headlines into local hearings. Communities are asking very practical questions about transparency, siting, and who's going to pay for all of this, especially with the new load. So recent analysis from the Wisconsin Policy Forum notes that data center growth is arriving after years of declining energy, electricity, and water use, which means that the scale and pace of the proposed investments are really going to reshape the utility planning and costs if they're not managed carefully. So at the same time, there are state conversations that continue about cost responsibility and clean energy requirements. Renew Wisconsin was just cautioning in one of their recent publications that simplistic on-site renewable mandates can really backfire on reliability and end up locking us into more fossil generation instead of less. And then from an economic development perspective, we have groups like the Wisconsin Data Center Coalition that are emphasizing that these projects can really bring in billions of private investment and long-term tax-based growth if they're planned well and aligned with local priorities. So there's a lot of different interests and things coming into play. And so with all that in mind, it's really essential that our local leaders and advocates and environmentalists are all asking the right questions. So the question to you four is, as data centers are coming into communities, what are the key questions that local governments, residents should be asking early in all of this process?
Do you want to start?
You should start. Let's have our local government expert start.
So I think the first thing to say about local governments in this is local governments are unprepared for this. You know, we have zoning codes, and there is zoning for light industrial and heavy industrial and commercial office and whatever. A data center is a very energy intense facility. It typically has backup generators, more of them than other facilities, and that's not in our zoning code. When we first learned that a hyperscale data center was going to potentially be here in Dane County, our county planning staff started talking about, okay, so how do we quickly update the zoning code? That's like a 12 to 18 month process because we, the county, update it, but then all of the towns in the county have to adopt it for it to be in place. That is not let's look at what a county in Virginia has done and pass it tomorrow. We have processes. So there's a challenge, I think, for us to even get our arms around these things. In general, I'm going to keep coming back to transparency is what I see as like a really critical piece of this. I think the way to, in a time when people are prone to conspiracy theories, the last thing you need are NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. And under no circumstances should any local government be signing an NDA. We are public servants, and for the record, when entities, and occasionally I get this request, someone will want to partner with us at the Office of Energy and Climate Change, and they'll say, but you need to sign an NDA. And I say, I can't sign an NDA. And they're like, well, we can make this work. And I'm like, nope. Don't even ask our legal. I'm just like, nope, I just tell them all, nope. I'm a public servant. Everything I do is transparent. Because we need the trust of our constituents. That's first and foremost. I think the other thing in terms of what we need to know is in the project here in Dane County, and I had a lot of relatively productive conversations with QTS, but it was really hard to get real data. So how many diesel generators are you going to have on site, do you think? Well, it depends. I get that it depends, but give me a range. And the lack of specificity became a point of concern for us that you know, again, conspiracy theories come from folks not having information and then going to the internet to see what happens somewhere else in the universe, which this is a fast-moving, Tyler will probably talk about this, like the data centers that Google built 5 years ago are really different than what you're building now because it's a fast-moving, so like it doesn't matter what your friend read on the internet about something in Georgia 10 years ago. That's like comparing your phone to your grandpa's flip phone, okay? Yes, interesting, but not relevant kind of thing. So transparency, transparency, transparency is my answer here.
I think Kathy summarized it really well. And on the transparency front, I think there's two forms of transparency that are important going forward. One is the relationship with the local government, but also the agreement between the tech company and the utility, which right now is bound by lots of confidentiality and limitations. And I think for us to have this conversation about all of the community impacts is we've got to address both. We need to be more out in the open on both sides. And then the other thing is, and Kathy is one of the leaders in the Wisconsin Local Government Climate Coalition. And these are all local governments who have very strong climate goals for themselves. And a lot of the conversations around data centers right now are going to make their job harder if we don't plan the energy side of this a lot better than we're being presented right now.
Can I just throw something in there? Because I should have said this and now I'm violating your, but that's what I do, violate those. The jurisdiction piece of this.
Transparently.
Transparently. The jurisdiction piece of this that Dan kind of alluded to is really important. So I run a county office with big climate goals. I have absolutely no authority in cities and villages inside Dane County, and really, even in the townships, like at best, I can influence things. So when I see a project coming in, I'm going to do what I can to influence it, but there are not ways I can stop it. With the data center, I had a reporter say to me like a month ago, so when is the county going to deny this? And I'm like, we don't have the authority to do that. Like the lack of civics awareness in terms of who has jurisdiction to do what is a problem in normal times, is maybe an extra problem in a moment we're really tribal. But it's really critical in these moments because like folks think that their local government can mandate a more efficient data center when we can't, only the state can set building codes. You know, there are like all these complications around jurisdiction in this that folks just don't know about. Okay.
Thank you both very much. I'm happy to talk a little bit from Google's perspective, in particular on the energy aspects of the data centers, because that's the field that I work in. Number one, I would say is affordability is really top of mind, and that's not only within the Google energy team, but that's all up and down the chain at Google. There's been a lot of reports. We have Google data centers in many different regions. There's been some real challenges in PJM over the past few years because they deregulated their energy system, and they have a market-driven sort of capacity market that is also responsible for keeping the lights on and having enough reliability. Now, MISO, Wisconsin, Iowa, these states we did not deregulate, and so there's a different situation, and all of these states have obligations to ensure there is enough generation, and we pay for that through our rates. And so there's these comparisons of rates, and there's these comparisons of reliability and comparisons of policy, and they're not apples to apples, so it's hard to draw conclusions. However, on the affordability front has become really a top of mind issue for Google, and making sure that we are, and this is policies we've always had, is to be sure that we are paying the costs that we are causing and paying for the energy and the generation capacity that is required to serve us. From 2007, when we built our first data center in Iowa, through 2020, there was not a lot of economic growth generally in the nation, and energy efficiency stuff was really taking off. So a lot of the data centers we built were actually filling in spare capacity that was available on the grid. And so this issue of, we were actually super helping. Right. Anybody in Madison remember what happened to water bills when Oscar Mayer left? Mm-hmm. Right, super large user leaves, water bills went up, I don't know, about 25%. So we were having the opposite effect. We were coming into these spots where there were holes on the grid and using energy in a way that actually benefited everyone. That moment has largely almost everywhere changed. And so what we've come forward with is what we call a capacity commitment framework, recognizing that it's likely that our utilities are going to have to build new generation to serve this new load. And it is not fair for the average ratepayer who's not needing that generation to shoulder the cost for that. And so we've come forward with a proposal that would have the new large loads commit to longer term contracts between 12 and 17 or maybe a little bit more years depending on the situation, pay 75 to 80% of the minimum costs of what those bills would be, knowing that if you build the generator, there is some revenue that can be created from the MISO market for the energy and the capacity. So you don't need to pay for 100%, but you're paying the vast majority. And you got to back that with collateral. Collateral means it's not three guys in a pickup truck saying, hey, utility, I want a gigawatt of power and I've got this land. Well, if the utility goes and builds that gigawatt and you sign a company up and they don't have any backing, if they go bankrupt, guess what? That bill's going right back to the ratepayer. So in our view, you have to have collateral to back up this financial commitment so that if that unfortunate event happens, somebody's there to pay that bill. So those are three really important aspects that we think the benefit of that, one, is it gets the load forecast right. So it kind of makes us and our competitors make decisions. Where do you really want to be? Because you're about to sign up for very, very significant minimums. Mm-hmm. It helps us hone where we want to be. And if it's a place where we're on the fence, maybe poking around, okay, we're not going to sign up for that. And it's not until you get those commitments that the utility's then putting it in an integrated resource plan or putting it in an application in front of the commission, right? So we think those are really important aspects. I guess I'll stop there for now.
Yeah,
thanks.
We could talk all afternoon. And I know that we have a little bit of a push time past 1:30, but we do want to make sure to get to group questions. So I'm gonna take us, Louis, I'm gonna have you start with this particular question, but I want to take us into the third sort of planned question that we have here. And I think I'm gonna adapt it a little bit because there are some fantastic questions coming in, and I just want to acknowledge that there's no way I can get to all of them. I think that some of these have been touched on to some degree. I would highly recommend you go and read the questions of your peers and see what's on everyone's mind, and I would encourage you, especially after this conversation, to answer these questions yourselves, like have some conversations at the tables if we don't get to it. And I'm also certain that these panelists will be available for one-on-one conversations and things after the fact. But with that said, like let's start taking this home. You know, we were going to shift into this this conversation about the technical realities of the data centers and the concerns that are associated with them. We've seen policy analysts and reporters pointing out combinations of constant computing loads and AIA adoption, changing both energy and water profiles, et cetera, right? At a national level, mayoral resources are echoing that local leaders need to clear facts on the energy use and that sort of thing. And I know that we were going to, you guys are voting, my phone's blowing up here. We were gonna start going into, like, for a technical standpoint, what should people understand about energy, water, and infrastructure use in these modern data centers, especially as the AI workloads grow. I'm going to add to that there's been a lot of interest in what happens if data centers are a bubble, and if that bubble, pops. And there's also a lot of questions around hyperscaling and why there are perceived benefits of hyperscale ones versus several smaller data centers. So, Louis, I'm going to let you start with this one, and I'll be quiet now.
Awesome. I think I will start with framing how much of the data center workload today is actually used for AI versus the traditional data center workload. AI today, the workload accounts for about 23% of the total data center workload. That means 77% of the data center workload today are still used for traditional application that we have been always using before the AI boom. Now, that number is going to project to grow significantly by the end of this decade to up to 50% of all the data center workload will be kind of focusing on AI. Right now, about 2/3 of those are used for training AI models, and about 1/3 of those AI workload are used for actually the inference, the use application when you're actually using an already trained model to search for something. And we're anticipating 2027 will be a year that the AI inference will kind of overtaking the training portion of it and will continue to grow after that. Now, Wisconsin had a number of major data center development from hyperscaler, as well as you mentioned what we call co-location data center, that they build these data center and they rent out to other different users. Many of these are actually focusing on AI application, like Microsoft data center in Mount Pleasant, Meta's data center in Beaver Dam. I think Vantage data center in Port Washington also have OpenAI as one of the tenants as well. Now, these AI data center, even though sometimes when you hear the word AI, sometimes it comes with a bad rap, but I do want to point out the other side of the coin that AI optimized data center actually come with its blessing as well. Because if you think about these data centers, they are the state of the art, the most advanced kind of data center with the most amount of capital investment going after it. They actually have much more efficient energy system as well as the cooling system that can significantly reduce the amount of water that the data center will be used. I'll give you an example. A traditional large data center that use maybe a typical evaporated cooling system that can use up to 5 million gallons of water per day. That is equivalent to feed a community, a town of up to 50,000 people. The Microsoft, for example, the Fairwater data center, and you heard from someone from the team from Microsoft earlier today, what they call the world's most powerful AI data center. They actually use a closed loop liquid cooling system, which means they only fill out the water once at the beginning of construction. And then the operational water they consume is only about 2.8 million gallons per year versus 5 million gallons per day. And that amount of water is actually very similar to the amount of water that would be used by a restaurant. According to EPA, a restaurant average uses about 5,800 gallons of water a day, which is, if you add up, 2.1 million of gallons of water a year. So think about the size of the data center built in Meta, Microsoft. And the good news I do want to share with you is the couple major development, the data center we have in Wisconsin, including the Port Washington, Microsoft, Meta, as well as QTS, they are all considering using a closed loop liquid cooling system, which means the amount of water they would consume are significantly less than what they are prior to some of the AI development. And then on the energy side, what you also want to know is how are we going to power these data centers, right? I think this is kind of like the core of the question. As of 2024, natural gas supplied over 40% of the electricity used for the data center in the US, according to International Energy Agency. And renewable, solar and wind, they account for about 24% of the electricity. Nuclear account for about 20%, and coal account for about 15%. Even though there are many different technology, the company, data center owner operator investing and piloting, but realistically speaking, the most promising solution to really power these data centers as they're growing in the near term is really natural gas up through 2030. And then going forward, nuclear, specifically small modular reactor nuclear, will be seem to most the promising solution in the long term because they provide really the 24/7 power, always on, the steady, predictable base load, and then that can meet the near zero operational carbon footprint a lot of these operators have are some of the realistic expectation for what will be needed to power these data centers?
Yeah, I can add a few things. From Google's perspective, we have long had goals to ensure that 100% of our usage in our data centers is matched by renewable energy. And so we have signed over 17 gigawatts of solar, wind, and battery power purchase agreements or leases in North America over the past 10 or 15 years to ensure that the amount of data center usage we have annually is being matched with renewables. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really evolved to a 24/7 look at that with an aspirational moonshot goal that it's not just sort of annual and netted out, but is in fact in real time. And the technologies available to do this are emerging. We rely a lot on wind and solar. We're investing in a lot of different technologies like advanced geothermal in the Southwest. We're investing in nuclear, multiple types of nuclear technologies, trying to bring these technologies forward to help meet this moment. One of the things that's, we hope, different about the AI data centers from Google's perspective is the ability to be more flexible and demand responsive. Whereas the traditional sort of search and YouTube, we're all using these services and we want the results when we want them, has a very steady, always on baseload power. We think with the AI and ML, we're more bullish that we can be more flexible. So when cold weather, hot weather, these type of events are happening on the grid, we can actually pull down our usage and be a grid citizen that's responsive and helping the whole system stay reliable. So we do think that's an important piece of our future.
And I think that it's really important to see that kind of demand response coming from the data centers too, that's a piece of it. I think the concern I have when I listen to those projections is if we build a bunch of gas plants to serve the data centers, even if they get renewable energy credits somewhere else to clean up their electricity, that means the grid that we're all living with is a dirtier grid than the grid that as a state we committed to for 2050 kind of thing. Because those gas plants are not going to go away in 5 years, even if there's a new solution there.
If I could just maybe add on to that, and I really appreciate Google's approach generally. And we have somebody that we trust and knows Wisconsin very well, thinking about Wisconsin all the time. But there's something about what Tyler just said that is a concern to me, which is as a company, they're pledging to net zero. But in Wisconsin, they're not pledging to net zero. And you're not here yet. But we just, in Wisconsin, approved $2 billion of fossil fuel generation that is primarily designed to support a different technology company. And that technology company has the same net zero goal, but they're building renewables other places, and their efforts here are building natural gas here. We've got to really, it's not going to help Kathy with her net zero goals. It's not going to help the state of Wisconsin. It's not going to help our clean energy industry. That the solution is, at least right now in Wisconsin, much more natural gas. But I want to applaud, this is the first time I've heard a technology company say, yes, we can operate our system and give a demand response. We can raise and lower what we need based on what's happening in the state or in the market. Demand response is a very valuable tool that we in Wisconsin are not yet taking full advantage of. I think there's some really exciting conversations happening around the state that we can move in that direction. But it comes back to, as I think about this, it's really about the risk. When we think about where the state is and what's being asked of us, one company in Wisconsin is going to double their system that's taken 120 years to build. So think about that, 120 years to build a system, let's say roughly 5 gigawatts. In 5 years, they want to double that. That's an extraordinary amount of risk for us as a state. We need to make sure we're designing and have the plan in place. And we have one hand tied behind our back because we don't have, Tyler mentioned it, integrated resource plan here. Our state's commission doesn't have the ability to look at all of those inputs that are coming in from our state's utilities and helping make the best plan for the state. And that we have to change really, really quickly.
And so I'm going to take it back from Dan there, because in Wisconsin, we say that the first priorities should be renewable energy and energy efficiency. And so some months ago, Rewiring America did an analysis that we could do rooftop solar to meet the needs of data centers. It would be faster to deploy than new gas power plants, and it would benefit a bunch of consumers, and maybe they wouldn't have to pay. This is like somehow the utilities would invest in that instead. In the last week, ACEEE has come out with a paper saying, well, that there's enough energy efficiency and demand response we're not pursuing, that could power the data centers. And so somehow we have to have a moment to look at, what are the options? I think there are really big forces here. The folks who say to me, well, we should just not have any data centers in Dane County. I'm like, really? We have a university, we have world-class medical facilities. We're using AI, people. This is gonna happen here. I think if you use things, you should see things in the same way that I have no patience for the people who say, well, there should be solar, but I never want to look at any of it. I'm like, sorry, you use electricity, you should look at, you should be glad you get to look at solar, not a coal plant kind of thing. But in that realm, we need to have there needs to be a conversation about how do these pieces fit together. And it's pretty complicated in Wisconsin because we don't have a planning process for that. We have a lot of, you all know, you're involved in the renewable energy industry. If you were gonna put 100 megawatts of solar onto the grid, there is a long process to go through to verify that is necessary. But when a 1 or 2 gigawatt customer comes to the grid, the utilities have an obligation to serve. That seems like we should have more planning processes in that somehow about how that all fits together. And we just need to engage in this and it's not about AI being evil, okay? The world is changing. We're gonna need to become comfortable with some of those changes. But we also need to do this in a way that there aren't big regrets. The thing I keep thinking about is a small, at a local government level, if an entity wants to build in your community and it's small, like a new restaurant or something, that risk is relatively low to you to go, yeah, we approved that and it didn't turn out, wasn't a good fit, they went out of business, whatever. But when we're talking about really gargantuan scales, the stakes become a little bit higher in that, and we need to figure out how to navigate that more smartly. And I very much appreciate what Google is doing and their commitment to being accountable for resources that they add to the grid. I think a piece of that is to, what I want, Tyler and I are old friends, so I can say this to him on a stage. I want you to think about, is there a way for you to make that, push utilities to make that investment in rooftop solar or efficiency programs rather than immediately going to, oh, we'll build a gas plant for you. Because ultimately you don't want a gas plant. You would rather all that other stuff happen. And so, yeah, how we get to that place.
Love it.
No, I'm
We're
sorry.
working on it.
You heard
Let's
that.
talk.
He's working on it. I will hold
Write
him
it
to
down.
that. I know where he lives. It's all good.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're at time, and I know that there's a slew of questions in the Q&A, and I do think that we touched briefly on most of them. Again, we welcome you to come on up and have a conversation with us now or throughout the conference, and definitely amongst one another What I hope that you walked away with today is an understanding that this is not a simplistic issue. This is not black and white. This is not just slap some renewable on it or, oh, just don't allow it. Like, this is a reality that's very complex with a lot of misinformation, and that there's good and bad and push and pull in all of this, and that if we are working collaboratively together and taking a moment to find those opportunities in which we can influence change, that Wisconsin can come out stronger for this, right? Or if you look at the immense impact that AI and data centers have on our national GDP, you will very quickly come to the realization that I did, that these are definitely not going away. These are embedded in our economy in a way that they're too critical to our long-term national health. And we need to make those who are in positions of power and policy making see the importance of, yes, there's an economic story, but let's also bolster that with the environmental and the community and the societal impacts as well, because they all go very hand in hand. So I know that a few of you actually came up to me today and said, Corinne, why are you on this data center panel? Like, what? Like, it was very confusing to some of you. And what I will say to that is that within the green building community and building space, there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration, and these discussions are really important. And I get to have conversations like this with entities that are making great leadership strides in our industry on a daily basis. And I sometimes wish that I had a little recorder or something so that you all could hear these little tidbits and these parts and pieces that are interwoven into what is possible for all of us. And I know that maybe the news and the realities of what's happening in our industries can sometimes get us down. But there is an immense amount of opportunity for people to engage and find those moments to move. And I would also say that I feel strongly that USGBC and other entities like Renew, et cetera, it's important that we're at the table having these conversations because people are paying attention for once. And just think, how often have you in the renewable energy space been really frustrated because people glaze over and they don't want to hear you talk about panels or policy or whatever, right? Like, we have had an uphill battle in the sustainability industry for a while to get people to care. Well, people are caring about data centers. They don't understand them, but we're experts in these spaces. Use it to your advantage. Have those conversations. Find those moments of informing them. I will tell you hands down that I contacted Lewis a couple of weeks ago after seeing a news article in which there was a sensationalized headline about the water usage of a data center that claimed they were going to use closed loop. And I was like, wow, that number's big. What is the deal? And he pointed me to the EPA stat that he looked up about, restaurant water usage. Why don't we ask about restaurant water usage? That number's terrifying.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we don't know, but we see these big numbers and we panic. So let's have that conversation. I'm challenging every one of you to engage in this conversation in a transparent, meaningful way. If you need help from USGBC or any of these organizations, and especially Renew, to make sure that we're cleaning up this grid, please reach out. And with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists for your time today and prepping. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.